Hello, lovelies. Welcome to Horror 421, the podcast, with your host, your friendly small-town horror author, Charles Campbell. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the frights in this week's episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Horror 421, the podcast. I am your host, small town horror author Charles Campbell. And today I have a very special guest. It's a guy I met at Days of the Dead in Atlanta this past January. And my buddy, author Bryce Gibson, said, "Hey, I want to go check out this guy who's selling books. They look pretty interesting." And so I followed my buddy Bryce over to Robbie's table, and I met Robbie Dorman and purchased one of his books called Underneath. And after I read the book, I had to reach out to him and see if he'd be on the show. So thank you for being on the podcast today, Robbie.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you. And like I said, Robbie's released all kinds of things. He's got like probably about 15 books. I'm roughly estimating, with a brand new one that he just released called "This Book Is Cursed." So I'm definitely interested to hear what that book's about. But the book that I bought at Days of the Dead is called Underneath, and it tells a very compelling and exciting tale. And if you're a fan of John Carpenter's The Thing, you will definitely love this book. But I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes and kind of let Robbie introduce himself and kind of give us your background and how you got into writing.
I have 15 books. I'm the day we're recording this, I released number 15. I'm already planning on number. Thank you. Any amount. Oh wow, that's lovely. I can use it after today. But I started publishing books in 2019. So 15 books in 5 years. People ask me, when you start writing? I'm like, well, I've always been writing. Like, since I could write, since I could pick up a pen or a pencil or had a typewriter when I was a little kid, like, I was writing, even if I don't remember what it was. I was always telling stories. And I think that's a similar thing that most writers say, is like, you always do it. It's was more about a decision to like try it professionally, to try and make a career out of it. I was at a kind of a crossroads. We had moved to my wife. We had followed my wife's career path into Canada and left me without a job. It was a conscious decision on our parts, and I kind of took that as an opportunity to. And the Canadian market at the time, the job market was pretty slow and pretty rough, especially for someone who's not native. So I was just like, well, I have this time. I'm looking for jobs and coming up empty. I will start writing. And then I kind of just didn't stop. I just kept going, and now I'm full time with it, along with podcasting as well. But
Well, that's awesome, man. I do admire you. I have a similar backstory, but this podcast is not about me today. I grew up, loved to write, but I didn't really jump back into it until my 40s. And I had careers, and I was a manager, operations manager, and did all kinds of other things. But when my daughter started college, I just got that itch to go back to it. So I applaud you for making a career out of it, my man, because what I read in this book is excellent. And I could definitely see this on the big screen somewhere. Again, it's called Underneath, and it puts you in the mindset of John Carpenter's The Thing. It's not a knockoff. It's not a copy. It's its own story. It's a great story, but it puts you in that frame of mind where the tension is built and you don't know who to trust. But anyway, I'm going to back up. Tell me some of your influences coming up as a kid and a young adult. What drove you into your love for writing? All the writers have their own stories. I'm interested in yours.
I mean, Stephen King, obvious. Like, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's most people say.
Yep.
They read Stephen King, and I grew up in the mid to late '80s, early '90s. And I read Stephen King. I was a voracious reader as a kid. I read everything, and my parents were pretty much hands off with most stuff. Maybe a little too much. Maybe I'm not complaining, honestly, but it was like I was probably reading Stephen King when I was 10 years old, when I
Nice.
should not have been, maybe. But and Dean Koontz, and then on a but then after that, I dig. You start you go to used bookstores, and I would scour the shelves. And I love my mom, because she would, when if we went to a bookstore, she would just say, buy what you want. Like and we did not have a lot of money growing up, but when it came to books, my mom was always like, well, it's books. That is the exception. We will spend that little bit of extra money for books. So I was, reading Clive Barker, and then science fiction and fantasy and all genre stuff. But I think writing horror, it feels right. It feels like the place I want to explore. It lets me explore monsters and metaphors and trash and cult stuff, and weird. I like weird stuff, so I want to write about weird stuff, and horror feels like the natural place.
Oh, absolutely, man. And one thing that really caught my attention when I went and perused your website, I'm definitely going to pick up another book or two in the next couple days. My problem is finding time to read. And then on top of it, I'm not the fastest reader in the world. And when you're writing a book while you're reading a book, is all kinds of other things go on. But um, the variety and the different subgenres you represent and put out there in your books is pretty impressive, man, because I was going through the list and they're all unique unto themselves. And maybe there are similarities between some of the titles as far as maybe content, but they are definitely diverse. So you touch a little bit of everything. My buddy picked up Killer Hockey Mascot. He hasn't read it yet, so I'm gonna do a book swap with him and let him read this, and I'm gonna take that one and read it. He picked that up from me at Days of the Dead. But yeah, but you go from burial to Killer Mascot, Hockey Mascot to the other, and those are like three. Based on the covers, there are three distinctly different subgenres of horror. So it looks like you kind of run the gambit when you write. Then you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No. I get bored if I like. I see people who write series, and I know that's, again, that's more business talk about, you write series as an indie author. It's supposed to be better for you because you can sell more books that way. But it's really challenging for me to try and write similar things, like in similar genres, back to back to back. I will come back to things. I've written now a couple slashers,
Mm-hmm.
and I do have one series, I guess a series. It's a duology. It's just 2 books, but I did do like a sequel. But even in that, the sequel is very different than the first book. It's more, you always describe it to people as Terminator versus Terminator 2, where Terminator 1 is like very gritty and very, down to earth and small. Like, it's just like, it's Sarah and the Terminator, basically. While
Right,
Terminator 2 is like big, and like it's blockbuster, and it's a little bit more fun, even though it's
right,
still very serious movie. But it's that idea of like, I get bored if I write the same thing. And I this is another one of my lines that I tell customers is, I like all kinds of horror. So I write all kinds of horror. I like fun, like Killer Hockey Mascot is more of a fun book. It's still, I try and make it, harrowing and intense and things like that, but it is obviously, it's about a killer hockey mascot. There's only so much you can do with that, but like with making it too serious and more too dramatic, like, oh no, this character, it's not character driven. While
right,
something like Burial, while being very premise heavy, is much more character based. Which is, it's barely, I call it a dark Western because I don't really like, there's horrific things in it. It's very, very grim, but it's a more of a Western than it is a horror novel. But underneath is kind of in between those things, where it is very much like, I'm taking the premise of the thing in Antarctica and stuff, in the research station, things like that. But there is a lot of grief, and like the character dealing with trauma
mm-hmm.
of a miscarriage, and and kind of growing through the trauma of what happens in the book. And I don't know. I can't. I don't. It just, whenever I always write, the thing I write next is always the thing that excites me. Because if I'm not excited about what I'm writing, the words don't come, right? I can't. It's very hard for me to just punch out something, even if I know I can do it. I don't necessarily want to. So I go, and those, like, my excitement is always to a new thing, and not to, like, I had a discussion the other day with a friend in my writing group, and he's like, he had read my slasher whodunit called Splatterfest, which is about celebrities getting killed at a horror convention. And
Nice.
he's like, you left it kind of, there's room for a sequel. I'm like, yeah, I think there probably is. I probably won't write it, and if I do, it'll be a very long time from now. He's like, you never revisit stuff, and I'm like, I'm not saying I won't, but it's more like, I don't want to have to. I want to be able to just do a new thing. That's where all the fun is.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I have, ironically enough, I have book number 15 myself coming out late summer this year, but my journey's taken a little longer than yours. I started writing again back in 2013, so 15 books in a little over 11 years. That's not bad, but it's not Robbie Dorman output, man.
I
That's
mean,
amazing stuff. But
I appreciate it, but everyone has their own. Everyone's different. Everyone's journey is
oh yeah,
different.
yeah. I was just hyping you up, man, because
I
you're really good. You're really good.
Thank
And
you.
the only thing I have to base it on right now is the one book Underneath. But and I don't want to make this a whole podcast about Underneath, but I do want to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. It's
where
by far my most popular book, so it's the one most people have read.
Well, dude, the old adage is, don't judge a book by its cover, but the cover is what drew me in, because when I saw the cover at the table, it immediately took me to John Carpenter's The Thing without knowing anything about this book. I was like, wait a minute, this feels familiar. So I picked it up, and it took me a while to get to it. But I know your inspiration for the book, or part of it, was John Carpenter's The Thing. But what put you in this mindset, and how did you come up with the concept, and what brought the story to you? Is what I'm trying to ask.
I mean, it's like with any idea for any book, it's it's almost sometimes. I mean, I won't try and be definitive about it, because sometimes it is all at once in a bolt of lightning. You get the entire picture of the thing all at once, and it has happened to me. But in that, it was multiple things. I have a habit of, like in whenever I'm idle or whatever, I will kind of peruse weird science headlines, or like new discoveries or weird things that are true, but I go, well, they're always the jumping off point. They're always like an interesting idea. And I had discovered a headline about people drilling into Antarctica and discovering the idea of finding things in the ice, not necessarily creatures like they do in The Thing, or an alien like they do in The Thing, but discovering, like, oh, they're finding things in the ice because of global warming, because the ice is warming up. We're finding new things, and it's not, couldn't be in that book. It is a little bit of techno babble in there with a unforeseen particle and stuff like that, and all of it is technically possible, but it probably won't ever. It's mostly impossible. Um, but that's the beauty of it. It's like, because there's that shred, that sliver of doubt, like maybe it could happen. I just kind of let that one little kernel grow into its own idea, and then I married with, I love The Thing. It's my favorite movie. I watch it all the time, at least once a year, probably more than once a year. And the premise is great, and the acting is great, and the direction is great, but it's really the tension in it that I
Yeah,
love. And that's what I wanted to capture more than anything. And that tone of, you don't know who you can trust or why things are you don't like, you never know the true source of most of the stuff. The beauty is what's not said.
yeah,
And I think I just pieced that together with, well, and I wanted to, and like, some of it is mechanical, some of it is practical. Like, I want to tell a horror story, and I want it to have a lot of action. I want a high body count. That means there has to be a substantial amount of people in the cast, right? There has to be, like, and I like that's the thing I like about The Thing, is that it has that kind of that cast. And I had, you come upon this idea of, like, well, I want my character to have a medical background, because I think that it allows me to write through her discovering horror directly.
Right.
And so that's another, it's like that's driven more by like practical matters of like, I want that perspective when I write the story. And it kept coming back to me, like the themes of birth and growth and change. And I'm like, well, and I had the idea of a woman who's had to go through this trauma of losing a pregnancy, and now kind of a mess. And you always, I like those kind of messy characters that are always like trying to piece things back together.
Right.
And I don't, maybe and strangely enough, Armageddon, the Bruce Willis movie,
Right. Right.
came into mind because there's oil drillers in that, but they're in a strange place. They're on a meteor, like drilling down into it. And I'm like, well, what if I put oil drillers in Antarctica? What if they're the ones facilitating the dig because they have knowledge of drills and stuff like that?
Right.
So I'm like, well, and then it builds and it builds, and you're like, oh, well, now they're against, well, who's the antagonist of this? I'm like, well, if my main character is a combat medic, um, blue collar origins, well, I want my antagonist to be white collar. I want them to be a more educated person.
Right.
And what can they deliver into this? What can they be? What can they represent? And it kind of just spirals out from there.
Yeah, Dr. Ian Schuler was, and if I hope I'm pronouncing the name
I
correctly.
think I mean, that's good enough for me. I don't know.
But Ian, he was kind of a pompous, arrogant, smart guy.
Yeah.
Is the way I read it. And he gathered everyone for these meetings that he would have, and kind of pat everyone on the back and drive them and push them and say, we have to keep digging, we're almost to the elemental particle, whatever that. And I don't want to give anything away because I want you guys to read the book, but there was a goal, and he was hell-bent on reaching the goal. And Mary, when she shows up, this is the medic who replaces, was it a medic or a doctor? I thought she replaced a doctor.
She replaced a doctor. She's just a combat medic filling in.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
largely what it is.
So for me, when she walked in, she was immediately asking the why. Well, why am I replacing this guy? And if you read the book, you know why she replaced him. I don't want to give too much away, but she's already coming in with the mindset of she's going to ask questions. She's not going to take statements as gospel. She does her own thing. She does her own investigation. She wants to figure things out. And then when the shit really starts hitting the fan, you see how strong she really is. But I really enjoyed every minute of this book. I'm definitely going to check out more. So you guys go to robbiedorman.com, pick up a copy of Underneath. But this isn't his latest book. This is the one I read, so that's why I'm gushing all over it. He has one out now, just came out. It's called This Book is Cursed. So I want to give him an opportunity to give us all an overview of that book and, what went into putting that one together, Robbie.
This book is cursed. My very quick pitch is a Twilight Zone-esque story about a cursed choose-your-own-adventure novel that kills you if you follow the wrong path.
Ha!
And it is... It's not fun, but I call it fun. I think it's fun for a horror reader. They'd go, oh, this is a fun book, even though it's filled with awful murder. But I don't know. It was like, again, it's one of those, this was more of those like more complete, like, oh, what if, like you think about, I think I just was reading about choose your own adventure novels, like the history of them. And it was pretty fascinating. It was pretty, I loved them when I was a kid. I devoured choose your own adventure novels when I was a kid. And I think the idea just popped in my mind. I'm like, well, what if it kills you? What if like you get to the, when I was a kid, you read the books and you put your thumb in the page. You're like, okay, I'm going to follow this. I'm going to go over here. Oh no, that's a bad ending. Okay, I don't do that. I go this other way. And I thought, well, what if you couldn't? What if the book decided that no, you chose this path, you must follow it, and it will kill you? And then it kind of spun out from there. And I really do my best in the book to the main character is a bookseller. She runs a bookstore, and she finds a rare copy. This book is one of one. It's the only one that exists. It killed its. This is all not. None of this is really spoilers. You find this out very early in the book, but it killed
Okay.
its author. Supposedly, this is all legend. And they have the only copy. And at first, they're just interested only because they want to sell it. They want the money. They're a struggling bookstore. And then it kind of spins out from there into chaos and into trying to track down where it came from and its origins. And then it kind of spins out into, I don't know, are you familiar with SCP, the website
I am
/wiki?
no.
Okay, well, I'm sorry I just ruined your life, because if you
It's
go
okay.
look up SCP, it will devour so much of your time. But basically, it is a fictional wiki site where people create. It's a fictional, based around a fictional government agency that basically contains supernatural objects
I gotcha. I'm looking it
and
up now.
people sometimes, or creatures or whatever. And I love it, and it's a common reference for me a lot of the times. And I thought, well, how do you, and those entries in that site go into great detail about explaining how they work and the rules governing each one. So I went, well, what is this book? How does this book work? Why does it exist? And those questions, as I answer them, it spins out into, oh, that's just the journey the protagonist goes on, because she's also trying to figure out, what is this book and why is it doing this and all that stuff. And this book is cursed. The title is just very much like that. It was me spinning around trying to figure out, I need to title this thing in a way that makes people realize it's not actually a choose your own adventure book, but it is about a choose your own adventure book.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And there is some meta. Also, if you're a writer, I think this book is definitely an easy sell, because it is about a book and it's about its author, and there's like meta stuff going on around in the background. But it turned into something a lot greater than what I thought it would be. But it is a slightly more fun book. It is dealing, like, there's twins on the cover. It's definitely referencing The Shining on purpose but it's all in that meta sense of like dealing with kind of, as a writer, the world you invent and the ramifications of it, things like that. I'm really happy with it. And all the early reviews are really good. It's been very successful pre-orders. I'm glad it's out there.
Well, cool. So if our listeners go to robbiedorman.com, I think they can order your books directly from there, and they're also available on Amazon and other bookstore sites. Correct me if I misstate anything.
No,
Where
that's
they can get it.
where if they want signed copies, go to my website. If you are, or you want, I'm on, it's basically everywhere. Currently today, it was, unfortunately, I'm having trouble with the paperback versions on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. I think it's because of my distributor, whatever, technology issues. But you can just, or literally DM me on social media, and we can figure it out. I can get a book to you.
Awesome. Yeah. I make books available on Amazon, but I push people more to my website because I don't know if you're like this, but I get a little more profit if they buy directly from my
Yeah. I mean,
website.
I try not be too. I will, if someone asks what I prefer, I will tell them, yes, please go to my website.
Yeah, go to his
But
website.
yeah, go to my website. But I don't. Jeff Bezos doesn't need any more money.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's more about, like, if some people literally, they will only shop through one place, and I'm like, it's
Yep.
okay. Wherever
Yep.
you want to buy the book, it's fine.
Just buy it.
It's fine.
So I love your background I love your background in horror. So I want to talk to you a little bit about maybe some of the, we talked about books a little bit and who your influences were, who you read coming up as a kid. But let's talk about movies a little bit. Tell me about some
Sure.
of your favorite horror films. What did you watch coming up, as a kid, as a teenager, as an adult? What do you like to watch in horror?
Everything. I think that's the
Nice.
other, like, everything. I watched. I literally, this past weekend, I went to see Late Night with the Devil.
I did too yesterday.
Was
Loved
really
it.
good. Was
Loved
really
it.
good. Yeah, I was like so tense by the end of that movie. But I mentioned The Thing. My favorites probably are like, and this changes. Like,
Yeah.
you say, "Oh, what's your favorites?" I'm like, well, they change from time to time, but Hellraiser 1 and 2. Uh, More recent movies like, let's say, The Descent or Midsummer, The Witch, which are like, again, like, I like action packed
Oh, we're
blood
the
and
same.
guts.
We're the same vibe, man. You're naming off the movies that are in my head.
I
Yeah.
also, but like, like, obviously I like 70s Italian, like I like Suspiria, but I also like the
Yes.
Suspiria remake. I like that they're very different from each other. Argento's very colorful and bright, and you have the Goblin soundtrack, and then you have the new one. It's very sparse and quiet, and the soundtrack is uh Tom Radiohead. I can't remember his
Oh,
full name.
yeah.
Guy from Radiohead.
Yep. Yep.
But
Yep.
it's very different. I'm blanking right now.
That's all right.
The Fly, Cronenberg. I love Cronenberg. I love body horror. 90. I like also like I would say The Frighteners. I love Peter Jackson horror stuff, which is a little goofy, a little
Yeah.
fun.
Yep.
I'm like, I like a lot of things. I like the fact that there's that much room in the genre that you can have a very serious, tense thing that has no jokes in it or very
Right.
little, like, or dark humor at most, or you can have very silly things that,
Campy. Yeah.
yeah, campy, and you're laughing the entire time. Like Evil Dead movies. I love Evil
Oh,
Dead. Evil Dead, honestly, all three, because they are so different from each other. um Lost Boys is probably my favorite vampire movie. um I use that as a reference point in my vampire book a little bit.
this will tell you. This will date me quite a bit. My wife and I went on our first or second date to see The Lost Boys at the theater
I
back
mean,
in 1987.
that's pretty awesome, honestly.
Yeah, love that. Love that movie.
I love Lost Boys. I mean, I but then, like, to think to the other end of the spectrum of vampire movies, like Near Dark,
Yeah.
which is not.
Oh,
It's so grim. It's
yeah.
just ugly.
I want to ask you if you've seen this other vampire movie. Not a lot of people have seen it, and I actually bought it. I think on Blu-ray. I think I have it over here somewhere, and it came out, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. Byzantium. Did you ever see that? It
Byzantium.
has
No, I don't
Gemma
think
Arter.
so.
Yes, look it up whenever you get time. It has Gemma Arterton. I think that's how you say her name, and I am not even going to try to say the other actress's name. But yeah, that was a very unique spin on a vampire tale. Um, it's called Byzantium. So check it out one day. You talked about vampires, and it kind of caught me off guard when I first saw it. I think I saw it maybe on a streaming service or something, and then I just bought the DVD because I liked it so much. But I watch it, every so often.
I'll have to give it a shot. I'm again. I'll add it to my long list of, you
Oh
mentioned
yeah,
not
yeah,
having
yeah, yeah.
time to do things. Oh man, of all the movies, all the things I want to watch and read, oh boy, try to find the time.
Well, you talked about The Descent too. That's one of my. That's in my top. It drops in and out of my top five all the time. But I've seen both versions, and I love the UK ending. I don't know what your opinion is, the UK ending versus the US ending.
I
Do
think
you
I
have a
like the UK
preference?
ending more. Um, I don't mind the normal ending. I think both
Right.
are fine. Honestly, like, I it's more about the journey for me a lot of the time
Yeah.
than like, oh, did it end well, or things like that. The ending is not the thing I remember about that movie.
Yeah.
Again, like, a lot of times, a lot of my favorite movies is how I feel. It's like that feeling I'm left with
Right.
afterwards, and what I think of when I think of The Descent, which is in my top 5 and probably just stays there, because it like, it dials up everything perfectly. It's like,
Yeah.
well, oh, everyone, these people don't like each other for these various reasons, and, like, I love any kind of horror movie or fiction in general, and I try and put this in all of my books, where the supernatural fear is only a part of it. It's only a slice. There should always be conflict before you get a monster involved or a ghost or a killer. There always should be human conflict and environmental conflict, and you are already on edge because the women in the movie are like, you're like, oh, they don't, something's wrong. Like you can
Yeah.
tell, like, and they get into it in the movie, but then they're in the caves and you're like, and I'm not super claustrophobic, but the way they shoot it, where they're just like, it feels
Yeah.
like there's this much space and they're trying to get through it, and you are like, and then the monsters appear, the cave monsters, whatever the hell they are,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh god, and you like and I mean, I could rave about The Descent all
No,
day, but
you're preaching to the choir, man. I love that movie.
it's and the way, like, the lighting, I think that's the thing I really like about it, because there's so many movies that do not understand how to shoot the dark.
Right.
They don't understand how to make darkness work, and you get like day for night, or like they make it blue, like it's just
Yeah.
really blue, and you're like, well, most of the time I don't like, but this is like, it manages to make the use of the flares and the limited light and the night vision, it makes that the dark, it doesn't make, I'm never in that movie like, oh, I can't see what's going on. You're like, no, you're not supposed to see what's going on. You're supposed to be listening. You're supposed to be like seeing the little tiny piece of the film that you can. You're like, you see just this little tiny portrait of their vision into this cave where there's no light. It's completely dark, and it understands that intrinsically.
Yeah. I agree 1,000%, man. I remember the first time I watched it in a dark room, and in movies, really, really good movies can do this, but this one kind of put me in the setting, and I felt the claustrophobia with these ladies, man. I was like, what the hell is going on here? It felt like it kept squeezing and squeezing and squeezing and
Yeah.
squeezing, and then
Yeah.
until the climax of what happened. The movie's been out for a while, so I'm not super
No
concerned
worry
about
about
spoiling
spoilers,
it. But
but you should see
yeah,
The Descent. If you haven't seen The Descent out there, you got anyone watching or listening hasn't seen The Descent, go see The Descent. The Descent's great.
yeah, it's excellent. And the movie I watched last night, Late Night with the Devil, that was very original to me. And maybe you have seen something similar, but I've never seen anything quite like that before. What was your
I
take on it without spoiling it?
I won't. Yeah, I'm going to do my best not. I think I'll try and only talk about the things the trailer kind of
Yeah.
already frames and discuss. Like it, I think it understands the the found footage aspect really well, and communicates that really well without also. I was talking about this with my friends after we got out of the theater about how, like, there was a point where I had the thought where I'm like, is this actually gonna, like, I knew it was gonna, it's obviously about a talk show in an exorcism, or not even exorcism, just a conversation with the devil on a talk show. And I'm like, are they gonna stick to an hour? And I'm like, and are they gonna stick to show format? And I'm like, and then I went like, obviously I wasn't looking at a clock while I was doing it, but I'm like, I wonder if I took a stopwatch to it, did they actually stick to an hour? Did they actually stick to those commercial breaks when they said you have 2 minutes? Was it actually 2 minutes? And I'm like, probably not, but it felt close enough that I didn't care. And I feel like that's what I wanted. I just wanted it to feel like it was actually a talk show. It felt like I was
Yeah.
watching it. It felt era appropriate. Um, there's a couple of, like, I just recently finished playing a video game called Alan Wake 2. Which is obvious. It's a sequel to Alan Wake, but Alan Wake is a writer inside this game's universe, and there's significant parts of the game where you are on some very strange talk show in this weird shadow world, and it reminded me of that a little bit. Even though Alan Wake 2 ends up it has more fun with it, because Late Night with the Devil is not a fun movie. It is dark and awful. I mean, it's great, but it
And
is not
awesome.
awesome. Like, I use those words as compliments, but it's more about the tone, where it's like you're laughing, people were chuckling, but it's mostly like out of
Yeah.
like discomfort. You're like, and there's like some moments where you're like, and then you're like, and then something awful happens. You're like, um, and then there's another game. Strange, I'm talking about two video games, but they're very top of my head. There's a game that's a little bit under the radar called Immortality, which is really good. It was probably my game of the year, 2022, 2023, whenever it came out. It's a very strange game because it's all full motion video. You're just watching footage basically. It's called Immortality, and the premise of the game is you're basically in like a very primitive film editing software with your controller or whatever, and you're scrubbing through footage from the 3 lost films of an actress. And you're trying to figure out basically with that footage, and there's some behind the scenes stuff, some interstitial stuff. You're trying to piece together what happened to her because she's vanished. And 2 of the movies are one movie's from 1969, one from 1971, and then another one much later in 1999. And they're all 3 different, like the 69 movie is very much like a Last Temptation of Christ, kind of like a slightly controversial, sexy, religious thing where like it's obviously in the same manner of Last Temptation of Christ, courting controversy, the fact that it's using religion and sex together
Gotcha.
with some blood and guts. The middle movie is like a detective noir thing, like very much like that 70s wave of like indie detective film. And then 99 is like very much like a thriller from the night, like a 90s thriller, like Single White Female, something like
Okay.
that. And there are multiple scenes in there of the actress appearing on talk shows. And so you're scrubbing through and it's like there's a Johnny Carson alike in there, and you're like scrubbing through this footage, and it's that same feeling. That is the closest comparison I have to Late Night with the Devil, because it's that same like something is wrong.
Yeah.
Immediately, like it doesn't feel right. You feel that you're like there's something wrong here. If anyone listening likes video games, give Immortality a shot. It's now out on every platform. It's such an interesting and unique. And speaking of movies, it's like watching 3 movies. Like you're piecing together 3 movies at the same time. There's like all these layers going on. And it's like also like honestly, as a writer, I found it very like almost educational, because you are also like figuring out like, oh wow, they're telling like 3 different stories or 4 different stories all at the same time. And I'm always like, you're always trying to achieve like, how can I make my writing a little bit more complex? How can I layer things a little bit better? And I feel like that's a great example of it.
Well, that's pretty cool, man. I consider myself a gamer, but I'm not a hardcore gamer. So I don't do a lot of first person gaming, just because they actually make me nauseous, to be honest
Yeah,
with you. But I do
that's so good.
yeah, I do the third person stuff, and and these games have been played by millions all across the world. But I love The Last of Us, The Last of Us Part 2. I think Naughty Dog's storytelling, especially in the first one, was really good. The second one, I didn't get on board quite as enthusiastically as I did the first one with the first playthrough. But when I played through it again, I liked it more. But anyway, you were talking about video games, so I thought I'd chime in
Sure.
there and
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a Last of Us fan. I know those are more big budget, high dollar
I
out
mean,
there games.
I liked the first one a lot. I thought it was amazing. I'm have I've probably controversial hot takes about number 2, which we're
Yeah.
probably better not off discussing.
Well, that's fine. I did too, but I played it. I played it twice now. On the second playing, when you switch over to Abby,
Yeah,
I kind of got it a little more, but it took some time to grow on me, I guess.
I think
Um,
it's more. I don't. It's not to say that the game is bad or anything. It's more about how it says things and what it's doing as a whole. Like again, it's my complaints about a lot of time about any kinds of art are very rarely like about the competency of storytelling. It's more about
right.
why are you telling this story, and what themes are you delving into, and why are you doing that. And a lot of times that's what I end up rankling against, and I have a friend who is in love with both those games and has played them multiple times. And I'm always like, and to the point where like he doesn't play very many games. He's very busy. And I'm like,
Right.
you can play other stuff, man. Play other games. He's like, well, no, I got to play it for the fourth time. I'm like, okay, sure.
Yeah, well, I do play horror games, but it's not just horror games. I'll play Spider-Man and all this other stuff. But The
Yeah,
Evil
yeah.
Within, that was a great game for me. I never played the sequel. I have it, but never played it. And then
I like the sequel more, honestly. I like 2 more than 1.
I
I think
haven't played
it's
it yet, so I might.
two's solid. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the shelf. It's been sitting on the shelf for years. And Resident Evil games, I love those. And when they came out with Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube way back in the day, I lost my damn mind when I played that thing for the first time. Love that game. Have the PlayStation 5 remake or PS4. It's the PlayStation 5 remake is what I have, but or remastered or whatever the hell they want to call it. No, it's a remake.
It's a remake, yeah.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
definitely they smoothed out some things, I
But I
think.
haven't played it yet. Again, the time thing.
Again, I was like, it's good. I enjoyed my time with it. I like the original and I like the remake too. I think the remake is different they smoothed out things. They made it a little bit more, I don't know. It's more about like interface, things like that, where you're like, it's clearly, they're like, oh, this game came out 20 years ago. Let's
Oh yeah.
make it a little bit more modern, make it a little bit easier to manage things, inventory, and smooth out the story a little bit. But
Oh yeah. Well, I remember getting that thing. When it was out on the GameCube when it first came out. You had two little mini discs that you had to play through.
yes, the little tiny
Yep.
GameCube discs, very
Yep.
cute.
Yep. And they had so much info in the game, they had to put it on two little discs instead of making one regular CD DVD format. But anyway, whatever. So I'm gonna get back to your books for a second. You've got a huge library, and I get asked this sometimes at or at conventions. I won't call them book conventions, but horror conventions or book signings or wherever I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
From time to time, I'll have a person come up to me, and they may do this to you. They say, "Well, which one's your favorite one?" And they're all kind of like my babies, They all have their own place in my heart. But I do have one that for me that kind of stands above the rest, even today. I'm going to ask you the same question. Is there one that maybe holds a special place in your heart above the rest of the books, or are they all different, and are they all kind of on an even playing field?
I get the same question. Yes, all
Yeah.
the time, and I think it's a fair question. I understand it. It's especially when you have a lot of books,
Right.
It can be a little intimidating. They're like, I don't know what to buy. What's your favorite? And I literally, I usually say it's either between Underneath, or Death Rattle. Death Rattle being my vampire book, but with another being Burial, with the aforementioned Dark Western. Those are probably my top 3. But it's like, why do I pick those 3? It's the ones I reread the most. If I'm, there's, as an author, especially as an indie author, there's times you're like, why am I doing this? Why am I, like, it's so much work and it's such a grind, and it's not glamorous. You're not Stephen King, it's a lot of like begging and pleading for space and for people's attention. And you have that imposter syndrome of like, am I, is this good? Am I good? Like, no matter who you are, I
Yeah.
think a lot of people understand that. But the books I go back to when I'm feeling that way, and I'll read those certain chapters, which I'm really proud of, are the ones that make me feel the most. And those are the books I go back to, where I will, like, the last chapter of Underneath, which is like, I won't spoil it because it does spoil so much if I talk about it, but
Right.
that is still one of my favorite things I've ever written. It still makes me feel a lot. And there's similar parts in Death Rattle, similar parts in Burial, where I'll read those scenes and I'm like so proud of them. I'm so happy with them, and they are exactly as I imagined them. I managed to make my words shape them exactly the shape I wanted, and that's generally my answer. But there's a part of me that's also like, well, all these are my, like you say, they're my babies. Like, yeah, they are. They're my kids. And like, none of them are Swiss Army knives. They're all very different from each other, and none of them are do everything. Some of them are a little bit more funny. Some of them are more serious. Some of them have a little bit more like sadness in them, and some of them have more action or bad attitude in them. And depending on my mood, maybe today I want to read the sad thing. Maybe today I really like the idea of this mystery that I had to write, which is like, that's another one of my couched answers is Splatterfest is a whodunit, and whodunits are hard as hell to write. That
I've
book
written one.
it's yeah, I may never write another one after that one I wrote because it is
Oh.
so friggin' hard to do. And there's a part of me that's just like, I'm proud I managed to pull it off. Like I got it out, and it makes sense. And I think the mystery is good. And so there's a part of me that's like, well, like when I rave, oh, these three are my favorites. I'm like, well, all of these were a lot of work. Every single one is so much work, and a lot of my time is put
Yeah.
into it. So, but underneath Death, Rattle, Burial for the short answers, but I could go on and pontificate forever about it.
Oh man. Well, I've only read one of Robbie's books, and I've already talked about it a couple of times. Underneath was, I'm glad I picked that book. I'm glad that's the first book I read by you. It won't be the last for sure. Um, but yeah, you guys go to robbiedorman.com. All of his books are available right there, and you can go to Amazon and different places. But I think you get signed copies right from his website. I'll definitely put links below where you can access his stuff. But man, yeah, you're doing it, man, and I admire you for it. And if we had time, I'd sit here and talk about the premises of all these books. But I do want to talk about one before we end this.
Okay.
Uh, Conquest. The cover intrigues me. So, can you tell me a little bit about that book? Because that may be the one
Conquest.
that I purchase next.
Conquest is my first book.
Okay.
Came out. That's my very first book. It's a werewolf book. That's like long and short of it is like, there's a big claw on the cover,
Yeah, I'm looking at the
and
cover.
and I do want to say, like, that was my first experience publishing and arranging for a cover artist. And when my cover artist gave me that cover back, the amount of joy I had in my heart, I cannot express. Like, I was so worried it was going to be bad. And then I got
Dude.
that cover back, and I was literally blown away. I'm like, oh my God, it's so good. But it's I don't know. Looking back, it was a crazy thing for me to do to write that book, and especially make it my first book, because it's like there's probably a dozen perspective characters in it. Like,
Right.
there are like a very short amount that are main characters, but there's so many perspective characters in it, and I think it worked well. But it was like, I very rarely do more than a handful now, and there's like a dozen in there, and it's like it was a crazy idea, but it's werewolves. Like about basically a pack of werewolves, biker werewolves. So it's there's a little bit of Sons of Anarchy in it, with like infighting in a biker gang. But
Right.
all the werewolves are bikers, because I thought, if you're a werewolf, and all my monsters, I always come up with my own little twist on them. There's nothing wholly original anymore, but I don't write a monster unless I can come up with a little bit of a new take on it. And my idea was like, well, werewolves, if they're going to change, become big monsters, it's probably really exhausting. It probably requires lots of calories, lots of fuel. Like, it's
Right.
a bodily process, so they probably have to eat a lot. And so you think, well, they'd have to try, if they stay in one spot, they're going to get found out, because you're going to say, well, if it's they're killing people or cattle or animals, whatever they're doing, people are going to notice and figure something's wrong. So who are like, they have to be nomads. They have to be like people who travel around a lot so they don't get noticed. And so it started with that idea of like a biker werewolves coming
Nice.
into this mountain town, with threats of wildfires. I wrote it right when, like, I was living in Canada at the time, and there's the Canadian wildfires have only gotten worse, honestly. But it's like that idea of like being in a small mountain town with wildfires on the threatening to surround it, while with werewolves at the same time, and then into basically a culture war happening in the town, political infighting between a sheriff and a mayor. And all of that thrown into a blender, and like you get basically like people trapped in the town fighting werewolves to trying to live, trying to survive, avoid fires, avoid werewolves, avoid the other humans that they also are having conflict with. But largely my werewolves are very like, they embody like, I don't know, outgrown masculinity. Like all the werewolves, they're not pretty. Like they're ugly monsters. They're not like, they don't really look like wolves. They look like vaguely like wolves, but they're like huge, hairy beasts with like, they're not symmetrical. Their muscles, like again, it's that idea of masculinity. Only men are werewolves in my story. There's
Okay.
no female werewolves at all. And so they're big, they grow muscles, even more balloon, cartoonish, disgusting, ugly things that have to devour and eat hundreds of pounds of meat every time they do it, because it's so exhausting on their systems. And that drive, like when you have that mindset of like, oh, well, you constantly have to refuel, everything starts looking like food. And I feel like I was trying to put myself in the mindset of like making my monsters monstrous.
Right.
But Conquest is, I think I described it recently. It's like, it's very raw. It's my first book, and it's like very raw version of me. And I go back and reread it. I'm like, I would change things. I think I would write things a little bit differently now, structure things differently, but I won't.
Yeah.
I don't want to change it because it's such a good snapshot of this very, like, I was like I hadn't written a full book. That was more like first one I published. I'm like, you have all these ideas bursting at the seams,
Oh yeah, for
and
sure, man.
you gotta get them out there. And that's what Conquest represents to me. And
And
I'm
your
still really proud. Still really proud of it.
yeah, your synopsis makes the cover even more awesome now that I know the backstory about the wildfires and what's going on in kind of their, where the wolves are coming from. So yeah, I'll definitely check that out. The cover caught my eye immediately when I was looking through your site here. And yeah, I kind of get the same vibe. The first book I self published was called Black Tears, and the story, I'll stand by the story to this day. But when I read it, I'm looking at some of the dialogue is stilted. So there's some things I'd change, but I'm not going to change it. It's the first one. It's out there. It is what it is, and that's where that was the starting point, basically. So, but I get it, man. These are excellent. So, we've had a lively conversation. I do appreciate you being on the podcast. We've covered this ground a couple times already, but what I want to do is give you some more time to promote your new book because it's brand new. It just came out, and promote anything else you want to promote, any upcoming appearances you may be having. I don't know your schedule. I don't know where you're going to be, but I'm going to be quiet and let you promote away.
RobbieDorman.com is my website. It has links to everything. Everywhere I'm at on social media is Robbie Dorman. Again, it's always my name. So if you are on, I'm most active on TikTok and Instagram. We'll see how long TikTok is around. I think I'm of the mind it's not going away. It'll just get maybe change shape a little bit, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But I'm on those places. I have 15 books. This book is Curse is my newest. It's a Twilight Zone-esque story about a curse chooser, an adventure novel that kills you if you don't follow the right path. If you like the Twilight Zone, if you like the aforementioned SCP, if you like cursed objects or choose your own adventure novels, 80s, 90s nostalgia, if you're a big fan of like writing meta narrative, like The Dark Half, Stephen King's The Dark Half, things like that, you'll like this book. It's for you. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's very approachable as well. It's not super gory. I think it's a good ride. It's fun. It's a fun book to read. It reads fast-ish. Most of my books are not very long. But it's my newest. Honestly, I think I'm of the mind that the best book is the book you want to read. So if you look through my catalog and you see you like werewolves, read my werewolf book. You like vampires, read Death Rattle, my vampire book. You like zombies, Dead End, etc., etc. Feel free to reach out. I have an appearance next month, 2 weeks from this weekend, I believe. Yeah, 2 weeks. I'm going to be in Tampa, Spookala. So if you're in a Central Florida area, Spookala is new but really, really good and growing horror convention. So if you're in the area, come out, say hi, buy some books. Also meet a bunch of celebrities. I think they have a bunch of people from Scream, the whole franchise there. So look out for that. I have 2 podcasts myself. One is called The Simpsons Show. It's about The Simpsons. Easy peasy. The other one is called The Cult Video Vault, where we discuss cult movies.
Awesome. Well, I will put links below, so everyone, you can just click right on it and hit Robbie up. Robbie, I appreciate you being on the show this week. Loved having a conversation with you. Always love talking to other writers and kind of picking their brains a little bit. And you got some good stuff out there, man. I do appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
And I am Charles Campbell, small town horror author. My latest book is called The Piano Witch. I do have another book coming out later this summer called Signature, A Cut Above. It's available for pre-order at valleyboypublications.com, but you can pick up The Piano Witch today if you'd like. And similar to Robbie, I have 13 other titles available on the site outside of The Piano Witch, and number 15 is coming out late summer. You can find me at valleyboypublications.com. We have a Facebook page, Horror 421, the podcast. Also host a musicians-only podcast called Backstage 421. So check me out there, and we'll see you next time on Horror 421, the podcast. Thank you for listening.
We hope you had a horrific time, lovelies. Thank you for tuning in to Horror 421, the podcast. Be sure to like us on YouTube and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.